Mining is more of a science than it is just digging. It's just not a matter of turning the machine on and turn the water on and start running dirt. You gotta figure it out.
Chris left the show after one big mistake lost them almost 50 ounces of gold. He had worked too hard for too long, and his body just gave out. The machines kept running, but without Chris, everything felt broken. The crew tried to fix things, but nothing worked like before. People stopped joking. Tune in, because right after Chris walked out, the mine nearly fell apart. The burden of 10,000 ounces. The Klondike doesn't grant legends, it carves them with hours, with frost, with mud, and with the quiet dignity of getting things done when everyone else wants to give up. Chris had been that man. Steady hands, steady voice, steady results. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't dramatic, but he was the difference between barely surviving and actually striking gold. For over a decade, he was the invisible backbone of a chaos machine that barely held together. But then he disappeared, and nothing worked the same again.
Water's our best friend and our worst enemy. If we can turn that pump down and reduce the water volume and stop washing all this gold out.
But in season 15, something shifted. Not in one dramatic explosion, but in 1,000 small breaks. Invisible hairline fractures that spread quietly across a man's will. The season began like many before. Early snowmelt, high hopes, high stakes. Parker Schnabel came in swinging, fists full of ambition, eyes set on a number that felt like a dare to the universe. The number hit like a slap. It wasn't just high, it was dangerous. It demanded every second, every body, every machine running on redline. And from the start, the math didn't work.
This is usually where the material hits first, and it catches a coarse gold. Usually it's one of the best mats, the first mat. But what I'm seeing is real fine gold. It's too much water. It's not letting the gold settle where it's supposed to.
3 wash plants meant 3 gold streams, 3 sluice boxes, 3 times the cleanup, and just one Chris. He had done hard seasons before. He had worked through injury, through cold, through exhaustion. But this wasn't hard. It was impossible. Every plant came with its own set of problems. Big Red choked on oversized rocks. Roxanne's conveyor screamed every 3rd hour. Bob's plant overflowed like it resented containment. Chris stood at the center of it all, trying to keep the pieces together with little more than muscle memory and quiet resolve. People noticed, but not soon enough. The jokes faded first, then the posture, the careful, measured motions turned stiff, slower. Not sloppy, never that, but strained. Chris wasn't falling behind because he was weak. He was falling behind because no one else had ever been asked to carry this much weight for this long. Parker saw it, but he was chasing 10,000. And when you're chasing a number that big, you don't look at bruises, you look at ounces. It wasn't just the physical toll, it was the mental one. Every error meant loss. Every second spent cleaning was a second not recovering. The tension snapped tight across every shovel, every cleanup tray, every soaked bootstrap across the gold room floor.
Testing out those 2 plants that we did today was a good thing to do, but we need to make some decisions. Clock's ticking.
The pressure climbed, but the crew stayed thin. No one wanted to move a body off a dozer or loader. They were already stretched. Chris had to make it work. He always did. Eventually, someone threw out a name, Tatiana Costa, a skilled operator, smart, focused, respected. She wasn't a rookie, but she had never worked in the gold room. Still, it was the only move left. Tatiana got the nod. She would be trained step by step into the one space nobody else wanted to touch. She came in like a lifeline. But a lifeline isn't a rescue, not when the water's already in your lungs. Chris tried. Of course he did. He trained her. Showed her how to clean trays, how to pan properly, how to identify gold loss before it happened. But each new lesson cost him more. Time, energy, sanity. The rocks didn't stop. The buckets didn't stop. And behind every tip, behind every shared piece of hard-earned knowledge, another part of him buckled. Tatiana worked hard. She adapted quickly. But even 2 people weren't enough. Not when the system was built around Chris doing the impossible, solo for too long. She couldn't carry his clothes. She couldn't rewind his clock. The extra help was too late. The damage had already been done. Chris never said it outright. He didn't complain. He didn't accuse me.
When it gets a whipping, it goes crazy, and somebody could actually get hurt by the thing. Think of a fire hose this big around, right? I mean, it just...
He didn't cry foul. He just wore it. Every failed hose, every double shift, every ounce short of quota. And then one day, without ceremony, he put down his tools, took off his gloves, stepped out of frame. In the hours that followed, the crew fumbled. Tatiana kept at it, but the room didn't feel the same. It wasn't about skill, it was about gravity. Chris had been the center of that space, and without him, the walls didn't quite hold. Outside the camp, the internet noticed. Forums lit up. Viewers asked questions. Was he fired? Was he sick? Was there some drama the show refused to air? The truth wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a plot twist. Chris Doumit was simply done. Done with breaking himself for a number too big to respect. Done with covering holes no one else would patch. Done with grinding every day toward a goal that rewarded no one except the spreadsheet. The Klondike had taken its toll, and it didn't offer apologies. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone knew. The operation would keep moving. Machines would keep roaring, but it would never run the same. In the history of the gold rush, plenty of faces came and went. But Chris wasn't just a face. He was the firewall between collapse and momentum. And in season 15, that firewall finally broke. One person left, and everyone acted like nothing changed. A machine with no heart. After Chris Doumit stepped away, the machines kept running, belts spun, buckets dropped, sluice boxes overflowed. But something was off. The rhythm was still there, but the soul was missing. It was like watching a beast breathe after its heart had been ripped out. The gold still came in, but every ounce felt heavier, more expensive, not in dollars but in spirit. Tatiana Costa took the wheel. She did her best. She stood where Chris once stood. She swept the same trays, handled the same mud, tried to spot the gold where it liked to hide. But the gold room didn't care about good intentions. It wanted precision. It wanted obsession. And above all, it wanted consistency. The kind of consistency only Chris had mastered, season after season, through cold, sweat, and fractured hours. The wash plants didn't wait. Big Red kept dumping dirt. Rock Sand kept screaming through the night. Bob's plant rumbled like a volcano chewing through gravel. Every hour brought more pay dirt, more cleanup, more pressure. And Tatiana, despite her speed, her focus, her adaptability, was now the only one standing between chaos and recovery. It was deja vu, only with a smaller buffer and far less margin for error. Mistakes started piling up. Not huge ones, but enough. A gold flake missed here. A tray was cleaned too fast there. A sluice box cleared out a bit late. The kind of thing Chris would have caught on instinct, long before it caused any real trouble. But instinct takes time, and time was what no one had left. Parker saw the reports. Numbers dipped slightly, just enough to itch at the back of his mind. He didn't panic. He didn't lash out, but he noticed. Everyone did. A few ounces lost per run doesn't scream disaster. Until you multiply it by 10, then 50, then 100.
Adjusted feed rate, adjusted water. It was a lot of fun, but definitely a challenge. Because you're like wide open material, wide open water.
Walk away.
Suddenly, you're staring down the barrel of 10,000 ounces with a leak you can't plug. The team tried to adjust. Tyson stepped in. Mitch offered to take shifts, but none of them had Chris's rhythm. They could move dirt. They could run loaders. But the gold room wasn't just a cleanup station. It was a surgical theater. One wrong move and the money bled out onto the ground. Meanwhile, Tatiana was burning out fast. Not because she couldn't handle the pressure, because she was trying to fill shoes that had been molded over 10 years of trial by fire. She wasn't just fighting fatigue. She was fighting ghosts. Chris's presence lingered in every corner of that tent. The way he labeled trays, the way he stacked pans, even the scent of the gloves he left behind. The ripple effects were subtle at first. A drop in recovery rates, a slower cleanup cycle, longer shifts for Tatiana, increased fuel costs from inefficient runs. But soon it became a pattern, and patterns are how operations rise or fall. By mid-season, the cracks were obvious. They were still pulling gold, but the momentum was shaky, like a wagon racing downhill with one wheel a little loose. You could ride it, for now, but the crash was inevitable. Parker sat down with the numbers. He didn't see failure, not yet, but he saw risk. He saw the fine line between record-breaking and ruin. 10,000 ounces looked less like a goal and more like a mirage, always there, just out of reach, promising reward but delivering fatigue. Even the dirt felt different, finer, wetter, harder to sort. The pay streaks weren't as consistent. The haul trucks kept overheating. Things that used to be manageable were suddenly massive. The crew started snapping at each other. Fatigue crept into every shift. Mistakes weren't rare, they were routine. And through it all, the goal room stood as a quiet reminder that ambition without support collapses. Not in one loud boom, but in a series of small, unforgiving snaps. The equipment paid the price next. Roxanne's conveyor failed twice in 1 week. Bob's plant choked on a crushed boulder. Big Red's pumps needed constant repair. Maintenance lagged, because Chris wasn't there to anticipate failure before it arrived. His absence wasn't just emotional, it was operational. In a world where time is gold, they were hemorrhaging both. Then came the weather. Rains hit harder than usual. Roads turned to soup. Pay dirt became paste. And still, Parker refused to slow down. He saw the finish line. He saw 10,000, and he didn't care what broke as long as they crossed it. But everyone else cared.
It's a tough call because it's a big pit that has to come out this year, but then the frost makes it extremely expensive. So we pulled the pin on it.
Oh, you did?
This cleanup will be the last one for a while.
Mitch looked tired. Tyson barely spoke. Tatiana walked like she hadn't sat down in weeks. The gold room reeked of oil and effort. Not hope. At one point, they brought in a consultant, a technician who reviewed the gold loss reports. He confirmed what they already suspected. Recovery was off by nearly 7% since Chris left. That's not just math. That's hundreds of ounces. That's millions in potential revenue evaporating into the tailings pile. They tried to fix it. Better wash cycles, new separators, extra eyes on the process, but they were putting tape on a dam. The damage wasn't technical, it was cultural. Chris hadn't just maintained equipment, he'd maintained morale. Without him, the operation felt hollow. Functional, yes. Profitable, maybe. But soulless. The thing that made it feel human was gone. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The machine had changed. And maybe it was too late to fix. Because when a man like Chris walks away, what he takes isn't just skill. He takes rhythm. He takes intuition. He takes trust. Things you can't replace with training or tools. Things you only realize are missing when the system starts to slip. Losing him was hard. Staying without him broke things even more. The cost of staying, the price of leaving. By the final stretch of season 15, the Klondike didn't feel like a mine. It felt like a wound. Not a fresh cut, but something that had been reopened over and over, deeper each time. The dirt no longer promised reward. It demanded sacrifice. The gold wasn't glowing, it was growling. 9,000 ounces. That's where they were. Close. Close enough to taste. Close enough to believe. But not close enough to rest. Because resting meant slowing down. Slowing down meant risking it all, and nobody wanted to be the one who let up. Chris Doumit watched from the outside. He saw the numbers, heard the stories. He knew what it felt like to hit the edge, to hang there, to look down and wonder how much farther it could go. The truth was simple. They were still chasing gold, but the gold was chasing something too. Blood, time, loyalty, and everything else they couldn't afford to lose. The Klondike wasn't a goldfield anymore. It was a grinder. The crew kept their heads down. Parker still pushed. Tatiana still worked her hands raw. Tyson took fewer breaks. Mitch doubled up on shifts. Everyone tightened their grip on the goal, even as their fingers went numb. But the cracks kept spreading. And with every ounce that came out of the ground, something else was buried deeper. Trust, balance, memory. The gold room, once loud with laughter and routine, had gone silent. There was no time for jokes, No energy for banter. The trays came in, the goal came out, the work got done, but nothing about it felt alive. Discovery's cameras captured the movement, but not the meaning. Footage without context, faces without feeling, ounces being counted like numbers on a ledger instead of victories. Viewers could feel it. Ratings shifted, fans commented, the heartbeat was gone, and Chris had been that soul. Not the biggest name, not the face of the franchise, but the pulse steadied the rush. Without him, the show felt like machinery. Effective but empty. Back on site, the countdown to 10,000 grew more intense. They were running out of time. The season's weather window was closing. Rain had come harder. The air was colder. The road was sludge. He needed those ounces, for the record, for pride. Maybe even to prove he could survive losing someone like Chris. Because every empire builder eventually loses a general. The question is, can they still win the war? By the final week, the crew was fractured. Not in friendship, but in fuel. They had nothing left to give. Eyes hollow, joints are stiff, arguments short, laughs rare.
Always dry gold outside, never inside. It lets off a poisonous gas, and you will mess yourself up if you don't.
Another cleanup showed a dip. A big one. Something had gone wrong. Gold loss. Not a mechanical failure. A human one. A shift missed a tray. A sluice box was cleared early. Maybe a sensor went unchecked. Maybe someone's brain was fogged from the lack of sleep. No one pointed fingers, but everyone felt the weight. It was the kind of mistake Chris would have caught blindfolded. It cost them nearly 50 ounces. That's not a dent. That's a crater. Nearly $250,000 gone in slurry. And worse, it happened near the finish line. That loss didn't just cost them ounces. It drained what little resolve they had left. From that moment on, the dig was quieter. Not by choice, but by resignation. Parker didn't rage. He didn't blame me. But the look in his eyes shifted, a mix of realization and regret. The empire was holding, but barely. He turned to the maps, reran the numbers, recalculated the schedules. There was still a path to 10,000, but it required perfection. A level of discipline they hadn't reached since Chris left. The team snapped to attention. For one final push, they rallied. Tatiana took double shifts. Tyson stopped sleeping. Mitch worked through meals. And Parker? He did what he always did. He aimed higher. Chris had always understood that. It's why he walked. Not because he didn't love the work, because he loved it too much to watch it turn into something hollow. And for Parker, that realization hit harder than the win. Because leadership isn't just about targets, it's about tempo, vibe, vision. Chris had given them that, not with speeches, with presence, with humor, with calm in the storm. And now that storm had no eye. Later, after the final cleanup, and long after the last camera had gone dark, Parker sat alone at the edge of camp. The ground beneath him, now chewed and scarred by weeks of relentless digging, didn't look victorious. It looked tired. The gold had been pulled, the goal met, but the celebration never arrived. What should have felt like a triumph now carried the weight of something hollowed out from within.
We have a neighbor. He approached me a few weeks ago when wanted to sell his property. And I've been in discussions with him about buying him out. And I just signed the deal today.
He didn't speak. No crew gathered for toasts. No one clapped or cheered, because deep down they all knew this wasn't a win. It was a reckoning. They had crossed the 10,000 ounce mark, but something vital had been lost in the process. The kind of loss that doesn't make noise, but still leaves everything quieter. Back at camp, the team packed up with the weary precision of people who had given more than they had to offer. Tatiana finally slept through the night without interruption. Tyson stopped flinching at the sound of pumps. Mitch kept his tools in hand longer than necessary, lingering near the trucks like he didn't want to admit it was over. No one said Chris's name out loud, not because they had forgotten him, but because it hurt to remember how essential he had been. Chris Doumit didn't return for a final cameo. He didn't explain himself in interviews or offer postseason reflections. He had nothing to prove and nothing left to fix. He let the footage speak for itself, let the silence echo louder than any speech. In his absence, the crew began to grasp what they had taken for granted: consistency, calm, and competence wrapped in the unassuming presence of one man. Some legends carved their names into stone. Chris Doumit carved his into gravel, tray by tray, cleanup by cleanup, until the entire operation stood on habits he had shaped with calloused hands and quiet grit. And when he finally let go, it wasn't a fall, it was a release. The kind only a man who has given everything can make with peace. Did Parker shift his loyalty to his legacy by letting Chris Doumit fade into silence? Share your opinion in the comments. Like and subscribe for intriguing information.